Hello.
Yeah, how are you?
Good. This is the
Nice
only hair I could find.
Hello.
Nice. Oh, it's a hat party.
Yes.
Cool.
Thanks, Jay.
Yes. So we will be starting our session soon. I see 17 people with us. If you're here in the chat room, could you say hi in the chat box? Tell us where you're from. Maybe let us do a short introduction about ourselves first. My name is Jaden. I'm an aspiring urban farmer, and here with me is Nitya and Yangan. Do a short introduction.
So I'm Nithya. I'm a culinary anthropologist. I also run pop-up dining sessions called Brunch Bandits.
Cool.
Thanks, Nitya. Hi, everyone. I'm Yangan again. You might have seen me from the previous panel. I will just introduce myself for those who are new. I'm co-leading the project together with this awesome group of people with me today on the panel. We're working on a SLICE project, which is basically an experimental platform for innovative solutions in the food and agriculture value chain, right? So we look at everything from food production to food consumption, as well as food waste recycling. And we're so excited to have this discussion today because we're going to talk about something that's very relevant to us in terms of building resilient food systems. So feel free to participate later on. I think Jaden, you'll be sharing with them how they're able to come in, participate, and ask some questions.
Yes, we've heard some really good content from Tai Ling, from Asushi-san, Taizo-san, Yang En, and I think the conversation has been great so far, discovering how can we be more self-sustainable in terms of our food production. So before so it has been a lot of information download, and right now what we really want to do is to open up the conversation so that we can all figure out how do we create this new normal in terms of food production systems in our country. So I'll give you a tip, a pro tip on how to best participate. So if you can see the participate button over in the screen, just click it, and then one of our moderators will be able to let you in to share your opinions or ask some questions. So feel free to jump in when we prompt you to. So make sure you also have earphones on and introduce yourself so we know where you're from. Otherwise, if you have some comments and questions that you like to contribute, please also share it on the comment box over there. We would love to hear from everybody. So maybe just to set some context, personally, I've been really thinking about how life would be if COVID-19 was to persist for another 1 or 2 years. I think that in Singapore, we are pretty privileged because of our extensive, diplomatic ties with neighboring countries, as mentioned earlier by Yang En. But in the future, if let's say, the disasters kind of take us on the longer ride, where, different countries need to fend for themselves, that's when we see how can we achieve resiliency in our own country's food system. So I would love to invite a special guest with us. His name is Dr. Jonas Jorin. He has been doing lots of great work in figuring out what is the concept of building resilient food systems. He's the co-director at Future Resilient Systems based in Singapore. It's a joint project between ETH Zurich University and Singapore. So Dr. Jorin has also had some experiences at helping developing countries such as Africa to build resilient food systems. So maybe if I could invite Dr. Jonas Jorin to share a little with us. Say hi if you're in the room.
Thanks for the introduction. You want to go to the slides directly, and I can just do a short input. Maybe quickly the question: what is a resilient food system? I think it's important to think. Can you see the slide? Is that okay? Okay, maybe let me just go ahead. I think you can all hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. So what are food systems? I think we need to have a profound understanding what we talk about. Often we talk about farming systems, which is a much more small-scale system, whereas food system includes many more players. And I think you, Yang and Tan, you already mentioned about it. It starts, in our sense, it starts with the input supply, where you have fertilizer being provided usually by commercial providers to the farmers. Then the farmers produce food, then it is being traded, and then it is being processed, and at some point it reaches the consumer. So it is a long chain, and what we can see is that a food system does not only have one value chain, let's say maize or wheat, but it may have multiple value chains, and they may all be interconnected. in order to provide the food security to a country. So essentially, we not only have these food value chains, but many of these value chains are also dependent on having, for example, inputs such as energy or water and so on. And so we are looking at a very large system that needs to function at all times, especially if we have a disruption such as a drought or a flood event. Then it may not only affect one single value chain, but multiple value chains. There may be cascading effects going across those value chains and across different stakeholders within those systems. So in essence, food systems are complex, and that demands for resilience. You can show the next slide. Okay, so what we have done about 5 years ago, me and colleagues wrote a paper where we tried to conceptualize food system resilience, and the question was very much, well, what is sort of the objective function? And then for us, it was important to ensure we have food security at all times. So in developing countries, food security is highly relevant in order to supply people with enough nutrition and to make sure people can have a good life and have enough well-being. So food security was something that we took as an objective function, and basically wanted to know how the food security can be affected if we have a disturbance. And this is a conceptual understanding. We can understand that food value chains may respond differently to one type of shock, such as a drought or a flood event. But we know that all of them may have, the aggregated impact of such an event may reduce the overall food security of a region, of a country, or maybe in this case, Singapore, a small state. And what we want to make sure is that we are prepared for such events. And basically, we want to develop anticipative skills that we can foresee such an event. And if this event happens, we are able to sort of absorb it. And if we are not able to absorb it, we at least can have strategies on how to recover from the event and eventually even learn from it. So you can see the cycle. You may have seen this kind of cycle before. When we talk about resilience, it is important to consider at some point there must be a disturbance. It can be a drought, it can be a flood event, it can also be a market shock, it can be any unknown even disturbance. Now in this case, maybe we have the COVID-19. We can think about what are the implications on the supply chains. So we know that Singapore is highly dependent on getting food from, for example, New Zealand. So I think recently the government made an agreement with New Zealand to ensure that there is enough food provided to Singapore. So that's one of the strategies to sort of ensure there is enough food security in Singapore. And there are many, many other strategies. And I want to highlight the next slide, which is something we have been doing before I came to Singapore about a year ago. We developed this conceptual approach, and it is a 8-year study that we started last year in Africa, where we look in Ethiopia, in Congo, South Africa, and also in Rwanda. We are looking at how can we sort of ensure that the peri-urban area gets not sort of neglected. What we have in many African cities, especially in the sub-Saharan region, is that we have cities growing heavily, people migrating from the rural areas to the cities. And what happens is that those cities cannot absorb and provide the well-being to the people. So we have poverty, we have sanitation challenges in cities, and we have in general low human security. So what we want to do in this project is to make sure that people do not have to migrate to urban areas, and instead can start to build up resilience and sort of develop a local regional food system. And one approach here is to really develop this circular economy by not only looking at the value chain in terms of a production perspective, that we can produce, process, and then consume, but very much look at the waste factor. So waste is something that can potentially, in those parts of the world, in sub-Saharan Africa, can become an income source. So for example, the consumers, they may defect from the body, and this material can be used as human waste that can go back as nutrients into the agricultural production. So this is one way how we can do. We can also, as humans, we can collect the green waste and we can compost it, and then it serves again as nutrients back into the system. We do have methods and applications in sub-Saharan Africa where this becomes a business model. So you can actually collect enough organic waste and then sort of process it to a level that you can sell it back to the farmer. And so what you gain is you gain extra income opportunity, and also you can generate sustainability for the soil management. So I think I have been to your mistletoe community once, and I think you talked about the black soldier fly, and that's also one example of how you can help the digestion, or the how to say the recycling of human or organic waste, and then that can go back into the system. So for us, it's important in this project. It was important to make sure that we do not forget about the farmers and make sure that food gets more appreciated, and this is something why we need to build on a circular economy. So the implications of this, what I'm sharing to you, is that, well, how can we sensitize urban people on this? And that was a question from Jaden to me before we prepared. I think one thing is to develop direct links between consumers and farmers. That's one important way. So what we have usually, also in the case of Singapore and many other developed countries, we have a disconnection between the consumers and the farmers, because we are going to NTUC or to cold storage or to some other retailer. We buy food and we don't really know and care from where the food comes from. And this is the benefit of the retailers, to then put pressure on the producers and get very low prices for the consumers. But what we need is, overall, we need an increase of food prices, especially agricultural prices are like the wholesale prices are too low. Farmers, the producer prices are not to the level that are required for farmers to sustain a sustainable living, and this can only be improved if we improve the direct communication between consumers and farmers. So with this, I think I spoke a bit too long, but maybe Jaden, you can take over.
Yeah, definitely. I think even in terms of in urban cities like us, we are quite keen to look at how we can support the farmers in developing countries to be able to gain more value out of the whole agriculture process, so that they be able to sustain their business. Younger, do you have anything to add regarding circular economy as in the context of urban cities? Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Jaden. Thanks, Jonas, as well. I mean, for giving us a good definition of food resilience and really using the circular economy as a way to achieve that. So I just wanted to jump in here, right? Because this whole idea about food circularity is also very central to our project at Slice. I think by now most of us are quite clear on the benefits of circularity, because they really help us to utilize our limited resources fully. So things like energy, water, and also to reduce avoidable food waste, so that we minimize greenhouse emissions into the environment. Right? Even for Singapore, there's an additional benefit, which is because by pursuing kind of like a circular economy, we are actually conserving land for better users instead of it serving just as a landfill, right? So I think one important aspect of food circularity to look at is really about food waste recycling. And the topic of food waste, I mean, it has really been the elephant in the room. It's something which has been in focus over the last 1 or 2 years as part of Singapore's plan to actually transit to a zero waste circular economy. So I think the fundamental question to ask ourselves is why is food waste even a problem to consider? Simple answer, right? Because when food is wasted, we're also wasting all of the resources that have gone into growing the food, the resources that are being used to deliver that food to our tables, and also to dispose of that waste, right? So this processes actually increases our carbon footprint, and it contributes to global warming and climate change, right? I don't know if you guys have seen this quote before, but it comes out in a lot of articles, and they always say that if food waste were a country, it would actually be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world, after US and China, right? So even back in Singapore, food waste is certainly one of the biggest waste streams that we have in Singapore. And in terms of recycling rate, it actually lags behind our average recycling rate for even things like plastics, and electronics. So I think the point I want to make is just because we don't see images such as plastics in oceans does not necessarily mean that food waste is not a problem. It exists, right? I mean, even from the slide, you guys can see that what we see is usually the visible cost that's on top, cost to the producers, etc. But what we don't see is the cost to our environment, cost to our climate, which has a lot more longer lasting impacts, and that actually constitutes the bulk of problems of food waste. And it really brings us the question of then what can we do to tackle food waste, right? And I'm pretty sure most people in the audience who have heard of how we have developed certain capabilities to turn food waste into fertilizer through composting. I mean, it's very common nowadays. We even have machines that are on site, like in coffee shops, in hawker centers, to actually process the food waste on site, right, through equipment. But there are so many other ways to treat food waste. I think recently NEA announced a project with PUB. So what they did was they combined food waste with certain sludge to produce biogas to generate electricity. So that's another way where we can look at things. And then another topic which has come into a lot of interesting discussion as well is what Jonas mentioned about black soldier flies. So using that as a way to actually increase the amount of protein feed that we have to be used in aquaculture or even like for human consumption eventually, right? So there are many interesting solutions coming up. And I think at this point, I also wanted to open the floor to the audience to see, like, what innovative ways have you come across that that people actually recycle, upcycle food waste? You can probably share about examples in your own country or even initiatives that are either top-down policies or even bottom-up initiatives and ideas from startups.
I mean, so Youngan, I just wanted to add as well, like, we know there's a lot of like ground up initiatives like SG Food Rescue, and like also there's a company, I think MiniWiz, that builds bricks out of food waste. And a lot of it, I think what we're addressing right now has got to do with end chain management of food waste. But there's also a lot of, like, before the food gets on your supermarket shelves, the amount of food waste that goes into landfills from the farmers to before it reaches the supermarkets, from wholesale traders. But then the positive things, biofabrics that are being made with food waste. That's a really great thing as well that's happening, I think. Yeah. There's a few questions here.
Yep.
What are the main hurdles to achieve circularity in food waste?
Yeah, I think I just saw this question coming from Cha-Chen. Yeah, so I think it is a problem because traditionally how we process food waste is always in a very, very centralized manner, right? There are usually trucks of vehicles that actually go on to consolidate the food waste, and then all that waste is being transported to a central facility where it's then processed, right? So the reason why we're doing that is because it's cost efficient, right? That's why we're doing this. But I think we need to look at how food waste can be recycled on sites as well, because of problems of centralization, we have to look at this solution. But I think one key limitation of that is a very practical issue. People have complained about foul smell in premises if you actually treat food waste on site. So how do we deal with all of that, right? And the second question is then on how can we still reap certain benefits of efficiency? Maybe, providing maybe tackling food waste at a community level rather than a individual entity level might be a solution to this efficiency problem. But I think these are really the two main concerns, right? Efficiency as well as maybe a very practical issue, which is foul smell. Some of these limitations are really preventing us from moving forward to a fully decentralized approach.
Jonas, I would like to ask you the question on you were mentioning that one of your colleagues is helping to develop a system such that the nutrient cycle can be closed in Africa. Could you share a bit more on how that process happens and what is the technology that is needed, or is it something that is more community driven?
The approach that we have taken in those African urban, peri-urban areas is that it is driven by the community. We developed or we proposed a set of measures or strategies or technologies such as, for example, biochar development or composting or having the black soldier fly or the struvite production and all that. So there's many ways there are technologies on how you can do it. But at the end, the question is, when you talk about circular economy, is do you get enough revenue? I mean, and that's a challenge. even in Africa, you want to at least offset the costs, and in many cases the costs, at least the fixed costs at the beginning, are quite high, and that's usually a big barrier to enter into the production of those things. So what we should have is an opportunity that we reduce the entry costs. I mean, the fixed costs at the beginning, the investment costs can be quite high, but then after that, once it runs, then it's not that high, the cost anymore. So we need to find a finance mechanism that allows people to do that. Going back to Singapore with the circular economy, the challenge is Singapore is highly urban. So if you live in an HDB house on the 35th floor and you should have a compost next to your, I don't know, next to your room, then maybe this is not so viable. But we could still have opportunities, perhaps in HDB blocks, to have centralized containers where people can come down with the bag of green waste and then sort of compost the green waste, and that could be done for a very small price. So I think that it's not so difficult for the mass of the people in Singapore to enter into a more sustainable way of composting or recycling green waste or organic waste. There are opportunities.
That's a really good idea. I think speaking to one of the MParks horticulture director, he did mention that, you know, we are still very reliant on fertilizers from our importing countries. So how do we actually help to achieve self-sufficiency in terms of the materials that we need for agriculture in Singapore? And if we could do it in a community level, it could be a nice form of community building, and at the same time we could, you know, reduce the reliance on you know, imported fertilizers. Yeah, thank you for sharing with us, Jonas. We would love to hear from you further on like how to build resilient infrastructures in cities. So we'll catch you another time. Thank you, Jonas. Yeah.
Thanks,
okay.
Jonas. Thanks, Jonas.
Maybe guys, now I would like to, you know, bring it to the other side on the supply chain. Yang-En, you did mention about decentralized food systems, production systems in Singapore. We have 3 types: commercial farms, community gardens, and backyard farms. And we have a great goal of achieving 30 by 30. And I'm just wondering if the two of you think that this is an achievable goal, and what does it take for us to, you know, get to the next level to be more self-sufficient?
I mean, I think your lead-on point earlier about how you know, in like more community composting, right, and how most of our kind of tools needed for gardening is imported right now. So we have to go to the root of the matter and kind of create more local sources of fertilizer, for soil, for seeds. You know, I think that's a key thing. But I think that 30 by 30 is possible if there is a bit more harmony between soil-based permaculture farming that focuses a lot on native plants, on regional plants, with precision tech, and more kind of maybe robotics to enable gardening and farming to become a little bit more accessible for everybody. What do you think?
I think to add on, I think really, in order for us to achieve decentralized food production, it has to be a combination of top-down policies as well as bottom-up initiatives, right? And when we talk about top-down policies, it's really about how we're able to transform some of our unused land or land that's not really used for productive purposes into spaces for farming. And for that to happen, right, for people to, I mean, there might be a lot of people out there who are interested in doing that. But the thing is, if you don't have a ready space for us to enable that, then it's pointless as well, right? So how are we able to be flexible in terms of our land use policies to enable some of these things to happen? You're talking about, in terms of top-down support, we also have grants. And I think 30 by 30 will definitely be accelerated because of this whole COVID crisis. In fact, I think just last week, NEA and NEWA actually announced the new 30 by 30 Express grant for scale-up production of eggs, local vegetables, and fish. Right. So this is additional funding support to help businesses that are developing local capabilities to reach that. So that's the top-down portion. And then for the bottom-up initiatives, I think in terms of citizens or people in the community, we have to take ownership as well, right? Ownership and really empower ourselves to be able to grow the things that we would like to eat, not just leave things in the hands of the government. So it's really a combination of both, and it's a very intricate mix. I think one of the ministers, I think should be Minister Chan from MTI. He did mention this thing. He did mention this during one of his recent interviews, right? So he mentioned that for us to be really resilient in our food supply, it has to be a combination of effective stockpiling, preserving our import chains to make sure that they're intact. So like what Jonas mentioned about the pact between Australia, New Zealand, and us to maintain the food supply chains. And as well, the third one is to really develop local capabilities in food production.
I guess the question of economies of scale will always come in, but I guess my hypothesis that if we start growing our own, we can become more self-sufficient, and we also will appreciate the food that we eat a lot more, so that food waste could also be reduced. So right now, I would love to open the floor up. If any participants in the audience would like to share about how decentralized food production is done in your country. You may be in Singapore, working on a community farm, or you could be in a country with abundant farming space. So that could really look very different as a country comparison.
Yeah, so just a reminder to those who want to participate, if you'd like to say something and hop on the conversation, just click request permission, the blue button on the top right of the black screen, and then we'll just let you in.
We've got ZXL. He did mention that compost bin can be co-seated with the bean centers if there's an odor issue. And then compost bins often attract rats. I did read up something about I think in China they are trying to move towards having community compost bin, and I think it's a race for like commercial composting companies to come up with a solution that is decentralized and that and can tackle this process a bit better, so that if you compost on demand and not leave it out there for like 3 or 4 days, then it will be more efficient. So how could we turn this food waste into nutrients and then apply it into our neighboring farm? And that's how I see the whole circularity systems. Also, I think besides looking at how we should decentralize food production, we also can look at what are we growing. I think someone from the previous chat did say that she's growing this superfood called moringa. So Nitya, you're the expert of native plants and herbs, and you are an amazing home chef. So what do you think about what are we growing in Singapore and all over the world? Do we need to relook at what we're growing?
So I think I'm a huge fan of moringa. I grew up with it. It's something that's really familiar to me. And the way it's coming into fashion right now is great to see, because it grows it's a native crop, right? Like it's native to this region. It holds a lot of cultural significance to communities in this region. It goes by different names in the Philippines. It's used in India, and it's used in Malaysia, Indonesia, and here. But I think when I look at biodiversity, which is, I think, key to sustainability, any kind of sustainability moving forward, I look at it in 3 themes, right? It has to be diverse, it has to be native, and it has to be culturally relevant. There's, in a place like Singapore, for example, a mega city where time and space and resources are expensive, you want to grow things that give you the most bang for your buck. Things that just grow here easily. Like if you throw a piece of ginger in a green plot next to you, it's going to grow. If you grow a piece of, if you just throw turmeric, it's going to grow. If you throw a papaya seed from a fruit that you're eating, it's going to grow. But if you're trying to grow like kale or strawberries, then that's going to take a lot more resources. You probably have to do indoor farming, set up an LED light system. So all of those things. So I think biodiversity starts on your plate, in what you're eating at home on a day-to-day basis. And for a lot of us right now, it's defined by the supermarkets. But I'm suggesting that we look at our environment, see nature as like this portal into our history and our culture. Like if you see the plants that grow wild in Singapore, then you're going to see where our food has come from, where it's evolved from. And I think some of the key species that you will see around here that are now being proclaimed as huge nutrient-dense food that's going to feed the developing world, it's stuff that grows here. It's jackfruit, it's banana, where you can use the stem, you can use the flower, you can use the leaf, and you can eat the fruit, both green and ripe. So that's how I think we need to approach it. So I think how I want to wrap it up is for everyone to think about the desert island challenge, right? If you were going to be stranded on a desert island, what are 5 crops that you're going to bring with you that is native or regional? So it's within a 100-mile radius of you. So just think about those 5 things that you're going to bring with you. And that's what you really want to grow in your community plot, in your home plot, in a larger scale. Yeah.
We've got someone in the audience. Her name is Michelle. She has requested to join this conversation. Michelle. So Nitya, one thing I would like to ask is like, how do we start that talk? I think certain things like moringa and like things like Sabah stick grass are things that I've heard that local farmers are growing. But how do we integrate it into like the diets of urban dwellers? Because it might seem like an adult food. It might be something that is very alien. How do we get there?
Yeah. So I think that's where the knowledge is at the moment maybe not connecting, right? Because these are foods that our grandparents used to eat. It's just that I think with the evolution of our more globalized world and supermarkets kind of, spending millions on testing crops that are going to make it. Oh, Michelle's here.
Hi, Michelle.
Whoa, go.
Hi. We are currently
Michelle.
at the farm.
Wow.
So we're actually out harvesting food today. I would like to call ourselves maybe a collective group. We are not officially a company yet, but I think what we are trying to instigate is for more urbanites to come together and grow local. So talking about like what you guys mentioned earlier, I think Singapore doesn't only lack the space to do so, I think we lack the skill. So given the scenario, if everybody is given a plot of land, would you know what to do with it? So if land is not an issue, then the next question that we as an individual can fill in is acquiring the skill set, where if given the opportunity, what are you going to do with it? So this place, we actually call ourselves Urban Jungle Folks. We've got a couple of friends coming together and learning how to grow native. So like what Nitya mentioned, why are you trying to grow a strawberry when there are so many local plants that thrive naturally, but nobody's growing it? So it comes back to the same notion. If given the land, what are you going to grow? Top 5 things. Everybody is going to try to grow something that they find in the supermarket. But do local Singaporeans know what you can grow in Singapore right here, right now, with the limited amount of space that you have?
What's your top 5, Michelle?
So Michelle, what are the things that you will pick if you have to grow 5 food so that we can start the education right now and we can all start growing it?
I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah.
This is moringa. It's currently my favorite vegetable.
Yeah.
Nice.
It just gets into everything from soup to quiche to curry to it goes well with the fish. I think Jack, if you know from Urban Farmers, he recently did meatballs with it. I thought it was a fabulous idea. Moringa if you have land. But let's say if you're actually in an apartment, I think what is more feasible is stuff like this. I don't know if you can see them, but this is Brazilian spinach, as well as Thai watercress. They grow really well in containers. And all you need is a stem cutting. So these will thrive easily in any homes.
While you move on to the next herb to introduce us, I also like to ask, like, as an urban farmer, what kind of support do you think it's very needed at the moment so that we can collectively grow that movement? Are there certain like constraints that you find that you kind of need some support in, or how do we do a collective effort and activate more people in this movement?
I think now from a ground up initiative is simple. It's like now the most important thing is getting people to come on board onto the movement. Because like I mentioned, I think land is widely available in Singapore if you know where to source for it. The question is, do you have the skill? So what I would like to see more is collectively people coming together and picking up the skill set. On top of that, funding will be great because in every startup, you need funds to start innovation. And the next thing, as a community level, I think we need to pull together resources. So just now Nitya also talked about permaculture. I think permaculture is something that is widely known in Australia, but in Singapore, how do we actually find a local equivalent? Nobody really has a game plan of like, okay, if I want to do companion planting, what is suitable right now? Right? So if we could actually pull together like-minded people to come out with something that the rest of the nation can kind of follow, that would really help.
I would
Thank
say
you so
that
much,
knowledge-
Michelle. We hope
yeah.
to come take some lessons at your urban farm. Are you currently doing it for education already? Is that your end game, or are you trying to go into commercial farming at the moment?
I think the primary objective is to educate as many people as possible so that you can empower the community to actually be self-sufficient. It also comes back to the point of decentralizing food source. We're definitely not here to grow to actually retail anything, but I think what I would like to share with more people, maybe in the future as a enterprise, is the knowledge of how to grow your own food source.
So something interesting
I guess that's a track for us.
Something that I read about is also how in Japan, I think they do decentralized agriculture production in terms of the urban farmers level. One thing they talked about was how do we also create a novel financial system for urban farmers. Let's say you have grown like lots of moringa, and then these are perishables. To a certain extent, you could go for a barter trade system, and I think that's great. But I know that there's also some cost behind urban farming, and I think if we could have a different kind of system to support urban farmers, I think that would be great as well. Yeah.
Yes, I think a collective effort is definitely the way forward, because as an individual, everybody will feel a bit intimidated by the idea. But if you can actually get a strength in numbers to actually get a movement rolling, only then would the majority of people in Singapore follow suit.
Cool. Thanks for sharing, Michelle. Catch up with you at your farm. We'll connect after this.
Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah.
So right now, maybe we could spend the last few minutes, discussing some of the questions that you might have.
I think Amanda has requested to join as well.
Amanda in.
Okay, one more.
Any thoughts from the panelists on resilience of meat, fish in the urban context? What do you guys think, Nitya and Yang En?
So I think I just want to add on to Michelle's point, actually. There is a lot of knowledge on permaculture farming in Singapore and biodynamic farming, companion planting. But I think what's happening right now is that the knowledge is not very accessible, right? They're in close-knit communities. A lot of the kind of farmers at Edible Garden City used to do so. Green Circle, Eco Farm, Fireflies, they all follow kind of organic permaculture style farming. And there's a lot of home gardeners and community gardeners who do so. I think it's about bridging that knowledge gap. That's a huge issue. In terms of fish and meat, so Singapore, funnily enough, used to have quite a few meat farms, right? We used to have pig farms, we used to have duck farms, and a lot of this was phased out in the 80s. Because they were hard to regulate, they were polluting waterways. And so Singapore, what we have right now is frog. So frog is a very good local sustainable option if you want to diversify your meat intake. It's both, I guess it counts as both meat and fish because it lives in both worlds. In terms of fish, there's a lot of land-based farming startups that are coming up. And also a lot of really good, well-regulated fish farms in Singapore. We have a lot of water. we just don't apparently have a lot of land. But I think only 2% of Singapore's land is legislated for agricultural purposes at the moment, I believe. I think that's going to change, though.
Yeah, I think we definitely see a lot more spaces dedicated to local food production in future. I think there's one development that's supposedly coming up called the AFIT. So it's a dedicated building to support agri-tech as well as local food production. So a lot to look forward to. Though I think based on Shiva's question when he asked about the resilience of meats and fish, I think the first thought that came to mind was that the future of meat is not meat.
Oh,
yeah.
The future of meat is meatless, right? It's plant-based, it's alternative protein. But I think because we're running short of time, we will leave that for a different panel session. So I think for those who are with us today, definitely do join us. We'll definitely have a lot more panel sessions for our future Audacity virtual open city events. We will probably intend to do deep dives as well. So into the various themes that we talk about, maybe more on food waste, more on black soldier fly farms, and also
we could do one where Yang En just eats different kinds of insects.
Yeah.
For 45 minutes.
Why not?
And alternative
sure.
mukbang. I think the Korean are good at making food videos, like people eating and getting paid to eat in front of the camera.
Yeah.
So guys, thanks for joining us at Virtual Open City. Sorry for the technical hiccup just now. And as what Yang En said, we are actually really looking at different parts of the food production and consumption and even post-consumption cycle. And we hope to extend this conversation and to really find out what kind of possible solutions can we adopt that is relevant in our city context. It could be even developing world context. Could we innovate solutions wherever we are and share the technology to the rest of the world? So we conclude today's official discussion. And we look forward to more discussions. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Yes,
Bye.
thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye.